let's look at lesson number 8, which is security administration. And really, what's changing here is that Linux 7 brings us a new firewalling product, firewalld. And the good news is firewalld and IP tables, you can really start with IP tables because you've probably already spent a lot of time building that IP tables firewall. And then you can begin to migrate slowly over to firewalld. Okay? Now, this is Al. And Al's curious, why didn't they just write a program, something in Python or Perl that would take the IP table rules and turn them into firewalld rules? Sound like a programming effort for somebody out there willing to make some money. Okay, so we're going to look at firewalld. That's what this is all about. There we go. Get the right button now. Packet filtering firewalls accept or deny network packets. That's what it's all about. The Linux kernel has a built-in packet filtering functionality. Netfilter is a kernel component that stores filtering rules. And so whether you're using IP tables, which have been around literally since rocks and water were new. I remember in 96 and 97, I was working for another company out of Richmond, Virginia. And we were joining something called a LUG, all right? This is a Linux user group in Richmond. And these two other consultants were running IP tables conferences in hotel conference rooms. It'd take a week to teach how to do IP tables. And so, 96, 97, 20 years ago, easily, all right? So, you can do both, all right, IP tables and firewall. You really only want to do one at a time. But if you've invested a lot of effort, as a lot of customers have, in IP tables, bring over out of the etc sysconfig IP tables file, copy it over from your Linux 6 machines to your new Linux 7 machine, and bring up IP tables. That way you immediately get firewall, all right? And then make the migration, because moving forward, you're going to want to have firewalld. There are some advantages, particularly as you change rules and dynamically reload, all right? Bullet 4 on the slide, moving forward, firewalld is the default. But here, in the initial configuration, you can run either one. Now, why firewalld? Changes do not require restart, because during a restart, you provide a vulnerability. And if that just so happens to be the time of that DOS, denial of service attack, you're cooked, all right? Another feature of firewalld is that the networks can be separated into different zones based on the level of trust. Once again, that capability was not really in IP tables. Okay, just really wasn't. So, those are two things that are important. Now, on a separate topic, you may not be using IP tables at all. If you were a Brocade customer or a Cisco customer or a whole series of other network box suppliers, one of the things that Cisco used to provide when I was in consulting was a firewall box. All right, and they ran all the network traffic for the consulting site in Richmond that I was working through in Oracle Consulting, doing database administration. I played with Sun boxes and HP boxes all day, and then at night I met with the Richmond Lug folks, and we experimented and learned Linux. That's where I got involved with Linux 20 years ago. It's dynamic. IP tables has been fairly rigid. All right. It does support network zones. It supports IPv6 and IPv4, where with IP tables I have to have an IPv tables 4 and an IPv tables 6 for the two different protocols. It does provide for a desktop bus using both IPC, inter-process communications, and RPC, remote process communications. And so the two configuration modes, there's a runtime. Changes are made in real time. Permanent changes are written to the configuration files and are applied when the firewall service restarts or your box reboots. And once again, as we talked a little bit earlier, I'm not so sure that the notion of being able to reboot the box frequently is all that important. Certainly with support from Oracle and the K-Splice, kernel splice tool, you can apply your ELSAs, RSSAs, and CVEs in real time. There are some configuration files. User lib firewalld contains the default configuration files as a directory. And then inside of the etc directory, configuration files are written to files in that firewalld there. Okay. And once again, you'll have some time to play with it during the practice. So, with the zone model, services predefined are custom services that are trusted. Ports, additional ports associated with protocols to trust. Masquerading the translation of IP4 addresses into a single external address also gets specified when you're using DHCP. And so if you're traveling with a laptop, like a lot of Oracle instructors, have laptop, will travel, or will travel for food, one or the other. ICPM filter. There's a very typical, easy-to-use command to tell me whether the IP address I have is a good IP address. That command is ping. And ping uses ICMP as a protocol. And so one of the things that IP tables did was it blocked ICMP. And it was doing that 20 years ago. All right. Well, first of all, that's the good news. The bad news is there were some enterprising folks who have written a new ping command that runs on TCP. All right. Get your favorite browser, go query what is TCP ping. If you want to be a network person and be concerned, go query, go take a look. All right. One of the features of firewalld, we have rich rules. It extends existing firewalld rules to include additional source and destination IP addresses and changes the level of logging. All right. But you had destination and source IP addresses in firewalld. I mean in IP tables. So that's not bad. You can take interfaces, and you can have, ETH0 and ETH1. ETH0 only accepts inbound traffic. ETH1 only generates outbound traffic. All right, and so those sorts of things are doable. Once again, they're a translation from IP tables. Okay. And then there is obviously in the etc sysconfig network-scripts ifcfg file. You can then go in and do your zone definitions. Zones. In the user lib firewalld zones, we have block, drop, home, public, work, DMZ, that's the militarized zone, external, internal, and trusted. At the DoD site that I worked at, we had a DMZ. And so on the outside facing the internet, we had one firewall. We then had a DMZ and a second firewall before you got into our environment. All right. And so that's not uncommon. Once again, we relied upon Cisco to help maintain that environment. Oracle is a Cisco company as well. All right. Now, a word about XML for just a moment. Your DBAs, once you get your Linux 7 server built, are going to install an Oracle database. There are 1,400 XML files. All right. There's another 800 or 900 Perl scripts. Okay. Now, you probably don't need to be an XML expert, but you need to be at least XML familiar. Know how to build an XML tag and how to close it off. All right. Here, we've taken grep. We want to ignore case. And we want to get the services that are in public.xml. And so we have SSH and DHCP v6 client. And there can be other services. All right. And so you get to pick and choose what services are in what zone, and you then get to pick the default zone. Remember, firewalld is part of systemd. So here is in the etc firewalld.conf file a grep for what is my default zone. And so right now the default zone is public. You have a get default and you have a set default. All right. And the get active zone tells you what the active zone is. And the syntax that you see here on the bottom of the page, you do a set default zone. There's also in the lab, in the practice, where you're going to use the firewall config GUI, and you can actually go out and change the zone. You can change it in real time, or you can make the change permanent. All right? So you can change it right now, test it, see if that's what you want, put Humpty Dumpty back the way he was. Or you can say, hey, I'm good with that. Let's make it permanent. It has a lot more robust testing capability than does IP tables, at least in my opinion. Obviously, firewalld is a daemon. It's a service, all right? The service can be a combination of local ports, protocols, TCP, UDP, destination addresses. We can have a net filter modules that automatically load when the service is enabled. And so in the firewalld services directory, there's an Amanda client, IPP client, MySQL client, a remote procedure call bind. You'll need that if you're doing NFS. A Bacula client, IPP, XML, NFS, Samba client. And you notice down here at the bottom, we have some ellipses, all right, which tells you and others. And so Al's recommendation, when we get into the practice here in just a little bit, you might want to do this list on user lib firewalld services, just so you get to see the complete list of available services. It is extensive. Services can be enabled for runtime. Service definitions can be edited only in permanent mode, because you're going to change the XML file, all right? And so if that particular XML file happens to be your default zone, that change becomes official. I guess that's a way to do that. Once again, order doesn't matter. You can do a systemctl enable firewalld and then do the start, or you can do the start and then do the enable. It's really your choice. And you'll need to do a stop on IP tables before you do the start here for firewalld. We have a firewall-cmd command. No, don't ask why it's not firewallctl. I don't know, all right? My guess is it was a different programming team and they were not familiar with the fact that control CTL, because firewallctl, you're going to control the firewall. It's a CMD, and down the bottom it says a command line interface. Okay. So why is it not CLI? Once again, I can't answer that. Once again, with the number of developers who are working on this, I'm not surprised that it's not alphabet soup. Oh, I guess it is. How about that? You'll play with the graphical user interface, and I will give you some warnings when you get into practice about lab dependencies in this course. All right. And then lastly, edit for various XML files. You need to have some knowledge, some familiarity with XML. I don't think you need to be an XML programmer, not by any state. All right, just don't. But you need to be not intimidated by XML or Perl or Python, for that matter. We may actually have you install the firewall config GUI. That pull-down menu there, it says configuration for runtime. Let's do it now. Test it. Make sure you're happy with it. And then pull the pull-down and make it permanent. Okay? One of the things I think that we probably don't do enough in this business is that we don't test. All right? You know, if we were in real estate, we would tell you location, location, location. We're in computer software, so it ought to be testing, testing, testing. All right? Just so you know. And so you have two menus. Okay? Where the red mark is, that's the back menu. Then where I put the new red mark, this is the front menu. And you'll notice there's an arrow over here at the side that allows you to move through services, ports, masquerading, port forwarding, ICMP filter, rich rules, and there are others further out to the right. Okay. Now, we did a lecture on networking a little earlier. And we had a network tool called the Network Manager. Remember that? And then we had an nmcli, where you could literally do the same thing. Well, we have a command, firewall-cmd. I can list zones. I can add services. I can remove services. Anything that I could do through the previous slide, through that GUI, I can do through the command line. Is there a lot more typing? Hey, you betcha. All right. But if you're at run level 3, you may not have a GUI available to you. And so we'll run you through a series of firewall-cmd commands in the practice. That way you get to at least try your hand at it. If you're going to use firewalld. Once again, you could be a Cisco company and you get your firewall from Cisco, which is okay. All right. All right. We took a look at firewalld. It will be ultimately a replacement for IP tables. Okay. And it provides really a better testing environment than firewalld provided. It also provides for more stratification of your network into trusted zones. All right. And so I think those are all important things. And so if you have been using IP tables, you need to seriously take a look at firewalld. Got a quiz. Which of the following statements are true? The default firewall service in Oracle Linux 7 is firewalld. When using firewalld, configuration changes do not require a restart, which is important. The IP tables service is not available. Oh no, that's not true. I'll tell you up front. Because you've got some transition. There's no sense in cutting your nose off to spite your face. Let you bring up IP tables and let you make a graceful migration. With firewalld, networks can be separated into different zones. I may have given that away earlier. Let's take a look. ABD. IP tables is not available. That's wrong. It is available. Absolutely available. All right, let's go do a practice. This is kind of a fun practice. Once again, it won't take a lot of time, I don't believe, to play around with it, and you get a chance to kick the tires and slam the doors to see how firewalld works. Let's go do a practice. Well, welcome back. These are the practices for Lesson 8 on security administration. And as we have done with the previous practices, we'll turn this arrow down. We have the practice overview, and we will explore and configure firewalld. And so 8.1 is exploring, and 8.2 is configuring. All right. I'll move that over just a little bit. All right. So let's let's move down. So we're going to make sure that firewalld is running. We're going to use the configuration GUI tool. Probably means we'll connect through VNC Viewer, which is what it looks like. We'll explore firewalld zones. We'll change the default zone. We'll explore both runtime and permanent configuration modes, and we'll show you those in the GUI. And we'll explore the firewalld services. So the assumption is that we are the root user on Dome 0, and we're going to connect to host 02 with the VNC viewer. And once again, I'm going to give you some different syntax here. So I am root. We are on Dome 0, and host 02 is up. All right. And so this XM command to execute VNC viewer and connect to host 02, there we go. And so you've seen that mosaic screen before. I'm going to left click and slide up. We'll then connect as the Oracle student. Password is Oracle. And so here, oops, no. I am root. I'm in the root home directory, and this is host 02. All kind of things that we would expect. Obviously, I've been running some of this lab in advance to make sure everything was set up correctly. And so status here for firewalld tells us that it is active and running. We do have some errors here, but I'm not going at this point in time really focus on those, because what we're going to do is we're going to go through here and configure firewalld. We have this firewall-cmd command. And once again, just like in the lecture, don't ask me why it's not firewall CTL. All right, my thought is that they didn't get the memo. Okay. And so lastly, we actually want to start the GUI. There it goes. We're going to put it in the background. I think I can stretch this just a little bit. Doesn't have to be stretched much. There we go. All right. So this is the firewall configuration GUI. Once again, we showed you it during the lecture. All right. And I can take and move the slider bar here on the outside. And I can also then scroll down here through the multiple services. And if you recall from the lecture, we had SSH all the way down at the bottom alphabetically. And we had the DHCP v6 client. And so those were the two things that were turned on. Okay. Let's go take a look here at what we're going to actually do. So we're connected. And here's the GUI. All right. And we're on public and we're on services, and we scrolled down the list and saw that we had two of them. All right. Down in the lower left-hand corner of the GUI, it does tell us connected. All right, and see that's the same one that's down here, connected. Okay. If the ICPM types, direct configuration, and lockdown whitelist tabs are not shown, select View from the top bar and then select each option. Okay. And so let me scroll back up. But you see we have ICPM filter. So let's click to enable them. And so you notice here, across this very top menu, those three titles have now been added. All right. And so now we're going to go out and explore firewalld zones. Note that there are 9 predefined zones. And so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 zones. All right. Now I have a window open here as root. All right. And so as we look at the user lib firewalld zones directory, we're going to have these same 9 XML files. All right. And we'll do a firewall-command get zones. And so that was one of the reasons that you started the GUI with an ampersand, so that we could then have availability to a command prompt. So ls user lib firewalld zones. And so once again, those are the 9 that you would expect to find. They match what was also in the GUI. And once again, listed, this time just as the zones themselves, without the XML definition. All right. So let's bring the GUI up again. All right. And so we have service ports masquerading, port forwarding, ICMP filter, rich rules. So services. Note that you can select services that are trusted in a specific zone. Once again, the only 2 we have currently is the IPv6, DHCP, and SSH. On ports, we can click the Add button. Note that you can add additional port or port ranges. We'll click Cancel. I'll let you do all that. Click the Masquerading tab. Note that you can enable IPv4 masquerading. Click the Port Forwarding tab. Page 2, I think. Click the Add. Note that you can forward inbound traffic to different ports. ICPM filter. Note that you can block selected ICPM types. Let's bring that one up. Destination unreachable, echo reply, echo request, parameter problem, redirect, router advisement, router solicitation, source, quench, and time exceeded. The typical command associated with ICMP has historically been ping. Now, once again, during the lecture component, I mentioned that there are some pretty smart folks who have developed a TCP ping. I would tell you the technology hasn't caught up with that yet. All right, just so you know. Okay. Rich rules, you can click the add button, you extend the existing rules that are there. Interfaces, and once again, there are 4 interfaces on this machine. Now, the interfaces can't be seen, but by clicking the arrow over here, the only 2 that are active are the 2 that are shown. And so once again, we did some configuration in one of the previous labs on ETH2 and ETH3 as additional private network interfaces for a private network. All right. And so once again, we can click on ports here and go back. And there are my services. So we can check the interfaces tab. Once again, we only have the 2 that are there. All right. And we can then take that CMD get active zone and so once again, the same 2 interfaces that we just saw a moment ago, ETH0 and ETH1. From the GUI, select either 0 or 1 interface, click at it, and notice that you can assign an interface to a different zone. And so here we go. And so once again, you can put it into a different zone. Not hard to do. Once again, through the firewall-cmd, you certainly have all the editing capabilities that you'd have here through this environment. All right, and so once again, I would suggest that finding the point and click may be a little easier than keying in a lot of commands. All right. We want to now click the Sources tab. And right now there are no sources. Okay. And we could certainly click an add button, and then we could give you an IP address, okay, to allow you to connect. I'll cancel. Okay. Now, we've gone back to services. Let me go do that. So we're back on services. We're good to go with that. And so we wanted to bring up this. Let's clear. Boy, that worked real well. Cleared off all my screen. So there are about 33 lines there. And so this is much like what's on the bottom of the page. Firewalld config file, default zone, the default zone used. If an empty zone string is entered, the default will be public, and so the default zone is equal to public. Minimal marks up to this minimum are free of use. For example, in the direct interface, if more free marks are needed, increase the number from 100, which is its default. Okay. And so all they're really bringing up is the public zone, which is the one that we're looking at, which is the default zone, which is public. Okay. And if we pull up the configuration file from zones public, which we had just a little earlier, there we go. And so here, once again, it's 7 lines. It looks very much like the file that we show you on the bottom or not bottom, how about top of page 8.8. Okay. And once again, there are some characters there having to deal with line 4 that's wrapped. And then the only 2 services names are that DHCP v6 client, which I showed you was checked, and then down toward the bottom there is the secure shell, SSH. And so once again, there is that DHCP v6, and if I was once again to scroll all the way down to the bottom, you would have SSH as the only 2 services that are currently enabled in the public zone. All right. And so once again, you can confirm that through the GUI as well. Okay. We did a CMD get default zone earlier, which is public, and we can change the get default to set default to be work. Okay. So it confirms that it's public. We'll change this now. And so now the default zone is now work. Okay. And continuing on here, if we do a grep for default zone out of firewalld.config, we'd expect to find the default zone is work. All right. Now, as you look at the list of zones here, which one is now highlighted? And so I'm going to select that one because it's highlighted. That's now the default zone. Okay. And so we're going to go check the default zone. And then we're going to do a set default to put Humpty Dumpty back the way he was. And so sure enough, it's work. All right. And we're going to put Humpty Dumpty back the way he was. Make it public. Now public, so I mean that's all done. All righty. Now, believe we're going to go back to the GUI. The default was work. We now made it public. And if I go take a look at the GUI, the word that should be highlighted now is public, no longer work, which is the reason that I actually clicked on work. All right. Sure enough, which one is now highlighted? Public. Okay. It also down here tells you the default zone is public. Had we looked at this particular place when work was the default zone, it would have said work. Work, 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 work. Now we're going to scroll back up to the top here because there is a configuration that makes changes in runtime, or it can make changes that are permanent. Okay. So when permanent is selected, changes are applied when the firewall service restarts. Note that you can restart the firewall service from the GUI by selecting Options Reload. All right. Note that in the permanent configuration, the following menu items appear under the list of zones, where you can add or remove, or you can edit. Okay. The configuration menu now, and select Runtime. I'm going to scroll down here in the window. And once again, this window appears here. Can I get enough? Yeah. Let's make this go runtime. And it changes at the bottom of the window. All right, that way you can see it. Make the following selections from the firewall configuration GUI. Select Runtime, click Zones at the top. Click Services in the lower row of tabs. Select the public zone from the list of zones. And so that kind of looks like the window. All right. From the command prompt, use the grep command to search for the services string. All right, inside of public XML. And I think we've done that kind of grep before. No, maybe not. And once again, they correspond. Nope. And so those are the two. And once again, those are the two that showed in the GUI as well. All right. And so what they want us to do here, I believe, is to take and add DHCP, just as sort of a general category. With the runtime configuration selected, the service is trusted immediately. Okay, it's not necessary to restart the firewall service and disrupt the existing connections. However, when we do the grep from previously, the only services that we're going to see enabled were the two that were there originally, because they are not, the change we just made is a runtime change. It is not a permanent change. All right. So we'll click here. We'll go here. We'll run that exact same command again. And once again, we get the exact same results, because the only changes that we made were run time changes. And like I talked about during the lecture component, this gives you the ability to go out and test your connections, all right, before making them permanent. File was not updated, and the reason the file was not updated is that the changes were not made permanent. All right. When we go back to the services window, if we click permanent, DHCP is no longer highlighted. Let's scroll up just a touch here. So we're going to change my runtime to be permanent. And as we do that, once again, it goes back to showing you that the DHCP service has not been selected. And so what we want to do now is click that. All right. Still not been updated yet. Scroll all the way down. And once again, even though we made these changes here, we now get a changes applied. And so at that point in time, I don't see it getting updated. I'm just recalling the commands. I'm not actually changing them, which is part of the problem here. Let's remove this intermediate directory. Didn't go far enough back. Much better. You know, if you search the right file, you get the right answer. Okay? It's amazing how that works. You notice here user lib, and at the top of the next page, the user lib has been replaced with the etc directory. Okay? And now there is the entry here for DHCP. Okay. Configuration files in the etc firewall are updated when changes are made. In this example, the DHCP service is now trusted. Let's go back and configure the permanent drop-down to be runtime. Okay. And so this time we want to move from zones to services. And then under services, we want to take a look at ports and protocol. So we're going to click on the next tab over. We have ports and protocol, modules and destination. And so the port number here for the Amanda client is 10,080 for both the TCP protocol and the UDP protocol. All right. And as you look at these services here, and once again, there's a fairly good sized list, there are corresponding files. That are in the user lib firewalld services directory. And so a list shows the Amanda client and all of the other files that are there. And once again, let's go do that. And so there are all of the services that are there. And then the firewall CMD. And so once again, you get a listing of services that have been selected to include the Red Hat Satellite Server 6. All right, part of that configuration. Okay. And so they want to pick on Samba from inside of that directory. And once again, there are some ellipses here, but we'll go ahead and just kind of do a cat of that. And so there's a little bit of XML stuff up there at the top. It talks about the encoding used. But then you get into the services short Samba, all right, and a description. So from the firewall configuration GUI, you want to select permanent. All right. Services can be changed only in permanent configuration mode. All right. So they don't really have a runtime application here. And so we can click ports and protocols, click add. Note that you can add, change, or remove ports. Click cancel. Okay. And once again, there's those pluses and minuses. Here is the add, so we can go in and make changes to these port numbers here. So click add, you can make changes, click cancel. All right. Click the modules tab. Once again, there's an add and a cancel. And click destination. And note that you can limit traffic to a particular destination address and to a specific internet protocol. All right. So to prepare for the next practice, which has to do with logging, make the following selections from the firewall configuration GUI. Select runtime, click zones. On the top row, click services. Select the public zone from the list of zones. Going to make runtime changes. Going to pick zones. We're going to pick public. DHCP, all right. In this practice, you create a firewalld rule to trust NFS. All right. You begin by configuring NFS host 02 as an NFS server and configuring host 04 as an NFS client. You stop the firewalld service so that the NFS client can mount the exported file system. You then create a firewall rule to trust NFS so that the NFS client can mount that exported file system. And so the practice is performed on host 4 and host 2. And so we want to open a terminal window on each system, log in as the root user. Prompts in the solution section include a host 4 or host 2 to indicate which system you're working on. All right, so what we want to do is we want to export a file system on host 02. And we really want to be able to connect there through a command line GUI. Okay. So I'll go here. I'll take this tab, clear. And so SSH, capital X, root at host 02. Password is Oracle. Alrighty. And so there we go, host 02. And if we built another tab up here, I'm going to do that so I can get zoomed in. And so I've got DOM 0, host 02, and then when we get ready to connect to host 04, And we will do that through this particular window. So let's go to work on host 302 first. Okay. And so fdisk-l for dev xvdd. We'll then do a make ext4 for xvdd, make dir /D dev, and then go out and make changes to etcfs tab to make it available. All right. So and so it's 20 gig. It looks like it's all there in place. Okay. Done. Good. mkdir D dev, and then vi etc fs tab, and then I'm going to do a capital G, gets me to the bottom, open a line below, and so dev xvdd dev ext4 defaults 00 xvdd dev defaults. Cool. Escape :wq. Mount -a df-h, and so here is this approximate 10 gig. We've used 37 meg, usually for inodes, and it's mounted /dev. All right, that's pretty much it. And so I did the mount A. Oh, and they did a df-h. I'd check that. All right. So now we want to go into etc exports. Nothing here, so I'll just insert and /D dev space glob for everybody, open round brackets, read write, comma, no root squash, no root squash. That's cool. Escape :wq. System ctl start rpc bind, one of the three packages, or one of the three daemons, if you will. All right, failed to start, failed to load, no such file or directory. You know, it would probably help if I would spell. I said RPC. That's not what I typed. All right. There we go. Much better. And it's up and running. The next thing we want to start is NFS. It too is active. All right. We want to do a system enable for NFS. Failed to execute no such file or directory, which is correct. There we go. All right. Because with NFS, what we did is we started the NFS daemon. All right, and that's really what's out there to be run. So there's the RPC bind to start the enable, which fails. The NFS server, which runs just fine. Status here on NFS lock. All right. And once again, NFS lock is also running. And now with us having just done all of that information, we're probably in the NFS world ready. Yeah, look at that, show mount -E. And so /dev has been exported to GRUB, which is really all of the available servers. Okay, so that's kind of what we would have expected. Okay. Now we want to change horses here. We want to go to host 04. And so SSH X root at host 04. Haven't been there before. We're going to store an RSA key. And the password is 6 letters, Oracle, all in lowercase. And so we want to do a make dir for remote dev. And then we want to mount this NFS share from host02 at :/dev on remote dev. Okay. So nmcli remote dev, and then we want to do a mount. Type is NFS. The options are read write, no SUID, host 02 : D dev, and we're going to put that on now. It's waiting for a network timeout before it actually fails. And the reason that it fails is you haven't stopped the firewall over on host 02. All right. So we're with me having up 3 tabs here, let me go back to host 02. It will fail eventually. And see mount system call failed. So we want to take systemctl stop firewalld. And so systemctl stop firewalld. Cool. Let's go back to 4. Well, look at that. It completed. We didn't have to wait for it to die. And sure enough, there's df-h. Down there at the bottom is host02:/D dev. Okay. Oh, they do a mount command here for grep NFS. All right. And so there's a couple of different NFSs. The one that we're obviously looking for is the one there for host 02. Okay. All right. The CD is precautionary. You can't be in the /remote dir mount point if you're going to try to unmount it. Okay. And so let's go in and unmount it. Cool. We want to come back here and restart firewalld. You attempt to mount dev on host 4, and once again, it's not going to mount, which is kind of what we expect to have happen, okay? So let's go back and start firewall. We'll just bring up that command and we'll change the stop to a start. And so we know the mount will fail. So from host 2, let's use the configuration GUI to trust the NFS service. All right. So in the firewall configuration service window, scroll down and select NFS. So here under services, there's NFS. And this is runtime, so it's going to happen right now. Okay. In runtime configuration, this change takes effect instantly. All right, go back now and attempt to do the mount again. And they're going to use the df-h-t to show you that it's running, in this case, NFS v4. All right. So back here, let's go to 4. Let's bring up this mount command. Oh, immediately mounted. Okay. df-h T. And so once again down there at the very bottom, it shows that the mount command that we used was for a remote mount and it is NFS v4, which is the latest release of NFS. All right. And so that kind of looks like it all worked. Okay. Let's once again unmount that piece of storage. And use the DF type H, and once again that will not be there. Okay. And so once again, the one at the very bottom, the NFS v4, gone. Just not there. And that would be what you would expect. All right. So now, the change that we made inside the GUI was runtime change. And so now we've got to make it a permanent change. Okay. Firewall CMD, permanent, zone public, add service, NFS. Firewall CMD reload, list services, and we should have all four of these now as part of public. That's clear. Oh, no. Let's go back to number 2 first. Let's do a clear here. Firewall CMD. Would probably help if it had 2 L's. Boy, the letters Z and I are not playing well together, are we today? So, firewall D, permanent, zone, public, add, service, NFS, success. And there are our 4 services. Okay. And so now we want to go back to host 04. Let's reissue the mount command. Once again, the mount command came back instantly. And there is mounted our NFS v4. Okay. So we're going to U-mount, all right, because we're really done here, all right. Going, gone. All right, as we would expect. Okay, let's go back to host 02 here. We have a little more cleanup to do. grep service etc firewall zones public XML. And once again, you're going to have all 4 of these. And so we're going to make a permanent change. And instead of doing an add, we're going to do a remove. Okay. So let's do the grep for service out of etc firewall D zones. grep. And then once in, voila, there's our 4 there. We did an add service for NFS. We're now going to do a remove service. Tells me that it was successful. We're now going to do a remove for DHCP. Again, we're kind of putting Humpty Dumpty back together again. So we did the remove for NFS, we did the remove for DHCP. If we grep, once again, the services, those 2 are gone away, and we're now going to do a restart. All right. We went from 4 down to 2, as you would expect. Once again, I'm a terrible typist. Okay. All right, so here we've got this GUI screen still up, and so I'm just going to go to File. Now notice the HCP is not here, and if I was to scroll down, neither is NFS, and there we go. And the other one is through File Quit. We did that, all right. And that should be configuring firewalld, which means that we're probably ready for lesson 9.